So good morning, all. I'm continuing with the topic of the week, which is right livelihood. And the subtitle of my talk today is Privilege and Choice. So when we hear the words right livelihood, especially when that word right is the translation, it can seem as though there are clean lines between right and wrong, between pure and impure, as if we could only just choose correctly. But many people don't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury of choosing how they earn money and how they acquire the resources to sustain themselves. I've been fortunate, really fortunate. I have had choices about how I earn a living. Um, but for many people, of course, work is constrained by training, geography, class, race, immigration status, health, caregiving responsibilities, etc., etc. People have to take the jobs that are available to them and available within systems that they didn't create. So when we think about right livelihood, we should consider right for whom, under what conditions, with what options. And then another question that I'm going to pose through this talk is really, are there any jobs that do no harm? It's such a high ideal. And I'm going to start with exploring my own story, my own situation first. It's what we often do in reflective meditation. And we often talk about our own stories in these talks, but it's more because that's how our practice works. Often we need to discern for ourselves how this functions in our life before we start to apply it to others. So I had really the class privilege to go to college and to drop out of college. Many people don't even get to go to college, much less leave it. And so I dropped out. I was part of that generation, tune in, turn on, drop out. And I tried all kinds of alternative ways to make a living. I grew worms. I wrote books. I picked apples. I waitressed. At one point, I more than entertained the idea. I actually tried to start making a business out of making wine. You would have to call it bootlegging, really. Um, but I had no idea, I had these oak barrels in my yard, etc. I had no idea that according to Buddhist teachings, because I wasn't tuned into them yet, making intoxicants would be considered wrong livelihood. But thankfully, that career never got off the ground, or maybe um, just to add a little levity, off the vines. Um, I was part of the Back to the Land movement, the lesbian feminist part of that. And we shared money and we lived very frugally. In the beginning, it was on $30 a month in food stamps. And it was really possible to survive on that little in the 1970s. But by the time the 1980s rolled around, I began to see that living at that subsistence level was probably not going to be a viable long-term um, plan, because there I was, over 30, with no clear way to support myself. Now, at this point, I had already just started teaching meditation, but it was really clear to me that I could not live on dana or donations alone. So at this point, I did have choices, but they were difficult choices, but still, I had choices. So I was hired as a purchaser of herbs and spices at Starflower, which was at the time a feminist worker-owned cooperative wholesale distributor of natural foods across the Northwest. How much closer to right livelihood could I get? It was feminist. It was cooperative. It was natural foods. It was worker owned. It checked every ethical box that I valued at that time. But sometime during the time I was working there, I went on a meditation retreat. Um, and as I often did at that time, these 10-day retreats. And it felt like I spent most of those 10 days thinking about the price of cinnamon. It was irritating. Um, so, especially because I believe that the only legitimate meditation objects were the breath or the body scan. That's what my teachers had taught me. But I kept going back to this scenario, which is what I did, for a livelihood, trying to negotiate a good price. This time it was for cinnamon. I actually negotiated for a lot of different other herbs and spices, but probably cinnamon was the one, not probably, surely, that sold the best. So I spent a lot of time in actually outside of retreat on that particular spice. Now, at the time, these things never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that perhaps actually using the stuff of my life, which was in this case the price of cinnamon, was a legitimate object of meditation. It was a focus object, came out of my life. And if I had it, perhaps it wouldn't have been so irritating. And it didn't realized at the time that getting a good deal, which was my job, was an enactment and from the adaptation of my childhood trauma of family bankruptcy. I didn't think about that at the time, so I couldn't even reflect on that. But nonetheless, this irritation set me off on a good direction. It set me off towards a new career. And that was a good decision because Starflower did go bankrupt a few years later when large corporations realized there was money to be made in natural foods. Once Safeway had natural foods in their food department, a small worker-owned feminist uh, cooperative wasn't going to make it. So our idealistic venture went down with the economic forces. So following my story, long story short, I went to graduate school. Now you might ask, and it would be reasonable to ask, how did I manage to go to graduate school after dropping out of college? Well, I figured out there was this place called Antioch, which accepted me based on life experience, which included teaching meditation. I actually I think I got a letter from my meditation teacher at the time, Ruth Dennison, and they made it legit. Um, Again, I had privilege, I had opportunity, and it was really good timing. Really good timing. So I built a career combining psychotherapy and meditation. In the earlier years, I had to lean into, and I did lean into Buddhist informed psychotherapy because I could make money doing psychotherapy, adequate money. And now I'm grateful that I have the financial stability to teach meditation. And I receive some income, though no one could live on it entirely. So I'm really grateful that the work I did to earn money was also my life's work. It really has sustained me psychologically, spiritually, relationally, and hopefully it's benefited many people. But it hasn't been pure. We live in a morally complex systems. Harm is rarely absent. Sometimes it's diffused, usually systemic, and often invisible. No doubt, I have unintentionally hurt some people, or maybe failed to help them, or misunderstood them. No livelihood is untouched by imperfection. So that's coming to the end of my talk, and I noticed I did talk about myself a lot, and but again, my goal is not to draw you into my life and my story. So again, I may have unintentionally done that, but more to hopefully draw you into your life and your story about how um, right livelihood, appropriate livelihood, skillful livelihoods played out, and really what choices you've had and what choices you've made. So meditate 30 minutes, and I will ring the bell. Welcome to anyone who is new with us today.